Item number 2, legislative update. 2A, receive and discuss report on 2017 legislative efforts and the impact of the 85th legislature on the city of Sugar Land. Rick Ramirez, our Intergovernmental Relations Manager. Rick.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Tonight we're going to go over our legislative program and the regular and special session. As an overview, I'll provide an overview of the legislative program. We'll review the Sugar Land priority bills that we passed during the regular session. I'll also discuss a little bit about the need for city representation in Austin. I'll provide an overview of legislative topics and bills passed, particularly unfunded mandates and preemption of the city's ability to make the best decisions in the interest of our residents. I'll go over some next steps, and then I'll open up for questions. So our legislative program tries to do two things. We try to support measures that empower the city to protect the health, safety, and welfare of its citizens, but we also try to oppose measures that would diminish our ability to function effectively or to erode our authority to be able to govern over our local affairs. Now, we did a legislative update after the regular session, but I'll go over the 3 priority bills that we passed during the regular session. HB 931 was a bill that we passed with Representative Miller and Senator Colcourse. That bill had to do with hike and bike trails. So with this bill, not just Sugar Land, but every city in Texas would be able to enter into an agreement with a utility company to be able to access their utility corridors so that we could build bike lanes, hike and bike lanes within those utility corridors at virtually little to no cost at all to our residents. It was a great legislation, and before that, only Harris County was able to do that. Now the entire state can do that. HB 2445 is a bill that we filed for Sugar Land, and also a couple additional cities are also in that bill. What it does is it allows the city to be able to receive a rebate for 10 years from the state on hotel occupancy taxes and other sales and use taxes to be able, for a particular area, to be able to finance the construction of a hotel and conference center. That bill will also save the city money to be able to do that hotel conference center. And HB 4297 is a commercial management district that we created for the Tract 5 area, which is right next to the Performing Arts Center. The main goal for that management district is to be able to coordinate parking and security for that area. Now, that's similar to where we're at right now, which is the First Colony Municipal Management District, and that's exactly what that district would do as well. Coordinate the parking so that it's all cohesive and be able to coordinate emergency management. So, why do we need to be in Austin? City governments represent the level of government closest to the people. And actually, city governments provide vital services such as police, fire, EMS, water, wastewater, solid waste disposal, drainage, transportation, infrastructure, traffic management, all the things that we rely on every single day. We also provide most of the quality of life services such as airport, parks, economic development and community development, public entertainment facilities, beautification of public areas, and these are all services that businesses and residents rely on for the city to provide. Now, because we have various different services, cities are affected by more legislation than any other organization in Austin. And to prove that point, in 2017, approximately 40% of all bills were city-related. If you look at the chart that I provided you there, you can see from 20 years ago, 1997, about 1,500 total bills were passed. You fast forward to 2017, about 1,200 were actually passed. So the amount of bills that were passed has been decreasing. But if you look to the right, the amount of city-related bills passed has actually increased from 130 to close to 300. So even though less bills are going through, more city-related bills are being passed. And you might be wondering, why is that? Well, many legislators in Austin kind of view the state government as the most supreme form of government. And they feel that the federal government is big and bad, local governments are small and bad, but for some reason the state government is right where it's at. It's kind of like the Goldilocks effect. So the national business lobby and large companies and other organizations have capitalized on this sentiment and have decided to seek legislation preempting city regulations so they could do their one-stop shopping at the Capitol as opposed to going to every single city within the state. Now, by doing that and passing legislation the way that they do, there are bills that create unfunded mandates. And these are state laws that require local governments to implement programs with financial costs, but they don't provide any funding from the state. There's going to be plenty of examples as we go through the presentation. And unlike most states that provide financial assistance to their local governments, the state of Texas actually relies on what we call reverse intergovernmental aid to fund the state budget. This is in the form of charging for administering municipal sales tax or the state municipal court fees. We don't have a line item in our budget that is coming from the state, and other cities in other states do. So I'm going to be talking about preemption as well. And there's been an increasing trend over the last few years to preempt cities. Now, during the 84th session, not this session, but the session before, Denton's fracking ban was preempted by HB 40. Now, that was a ban that was voted for by the citizens of Denton, and that ban was rescinded by HB 40. During this session, transportation network company ordinances were also preempted by HB 100. The citizens of Austin had voted for the TNC ordinance, and HB 100 took that away. Little known fact, it was Uber that had asked Austin to bring the ordinance to a vote, and then the citizens voted against Uber. And then the texting while driving ordinances were all preempted by HB 62 this session as well. We had done an online town hall before implementing ours, and we showed that 66% of the respondents to the online town hall had preferred a hands-free ordinance. This legislation preempts that and does a statewide texting while driving ordinance. Now, it's easy to say that it's preempting cities, but in these cases, they're preempting citizens. So it's important to make that distinction. Now, going into texting while driving, HB 62, it's great that they passed a statewide texting while driving ordinance, but it provides some defenses to prosecutions that kind of make it very difficult for our police officers to be able to enforce. They provide a defensive prosecution for GPS navigation or obtaining information about road conditions. As I said, police are going to be very hard pressed to figure out what you're doing on your phone, and ultimately it's going to make it less effective and decrease public safety. So the police department will be coming back to City Council on September 5th to discuss possibly rescinding Sugar Land's hands-free ordinance. Now, HB 70 and SB 14, we spoke with our legislators about these bills, and we actually did go to Austin and testify on them. Our tree ordinance is for commercial properties and protected trees. And the ordinance provides what we call a line-of-sight buffer between a commercial property and a residential neighborhood, essentially so that a business can't see into your backyard or into your house. If the legislation was passed, the city would be unable to protect citizens if a commercial business brought that tree down. Additionally, we would have no authority to be able to protect what we consider a protected tree. That bill did fail to pass. HB 7, which actually did pass, we worked with the author of this bill, as well. Now, this bill, as it is now, as it was passed, only affects mitigation fees. But before, there was an amendment that actually made it a little bit more broad. So we worked with the author of the bill to ensure that they understood our concerns about the relationship between the commercial and the residential properties. And after working with them, the bill was amended to apply only to residential mitigation fees. And so it doesn't have an impact anymore on the city. There's also bills about building safety. SB 13, which did not pass, would have automatically approved permit applications if a municipality didn't approve of the permit quickly enough. That means basically that building could be completely out of compliance with codes, completely. But if the city didn't review the permit application in time, in a shortened time frame, it could still be built. When we testified, we told them that's sacrificing public safety for a speedier permitting process. Luckily, the bill didn't pass. SB 12, we also did testify on that one, and that one sought to prohibit cities from enforcing ordinances on property that were not in place when a property was acquired. So the bill would have created all kinds of inequities from one neighbor to the other, where one neighbor is protected by updating building codes and fire codes, and another neighbor is not. It also would have been a huge unfunded mandate. Cities would have to have had created large databases to determine when a property exchanged hands and, at that time, what ordinance were in place. This would have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, after explaining all the glaring mistakes in the bill, the author was quoted as, in the Texas Tribune as saying, in all fairness, we realized there were a bunch of unintended consequences. So those are instances where we've actually testified in Austin and shown our legislators exactly what happens. There were also unfunded mandates in bills that did pass related to purchasing. Some legislation not only preempts cities and citizens, but they go into our very processes of how we interact with our consultants and our contractors. And when that happens, they really can create some really serious unfunded mandates. HB 89 and SB 252 require that the comptroller create a list with companies that boycott Israel or do business with Iran, Sudan, or even foreign terrorist organizations. Now the city is going to have to spend additional staff time to ensure that this information is correct and accurate and compare it to the comptroller's list, which hasn't been created yet, even though it's going to be in effect September 1st, and ensure that the companies comply. And although the state didn't provide additional funds to be able to do this, we still have to comply with these requests. Additionally, SB 1289, which also did pass, was for projects with the state, and that we can only use U.S. steel. So now the city is going to have to require that we understand where the origin of the steel that's being used for our products is coming, again, with no additional funding from the state. So, of course, these are not the only bills that have unfunded mandates, but many of the bills discussed tonight come with price tags that are not covered by the state. But these are pretty good examples. Now, we've talked a lot about SB 1004, and communications companies like AT&T and Crown Castle, they sought legislation to grant them the right to access the public right-of-way to place cellular nodes on vertical structures at very, very little cost. And prior to the passage of 1004, which this bill did pass, no other private company has been granted unfettered access to the public right-of-way. So this is the first time that this has happened. Now, we met with our legislators to illustrate how the legislation would decrease the beauty of the public right-of-way, how it would provide land to a private entity at a fraction of what it's worth, and how it would make it more difficult to manage the public right-of-way. And ultimately, the bill did pass. Now, the bill that did pass is much better than the bill that was originally filed. the whole design manual, all that kind of stuff, the spacing requirements, was not in the original filed bill. So with the effort of our staff and other cities, we were able to at least make the bill a little bit more palatable than what it was originally. So beginning September 1st, these companies will be granted access to the public right-of-way at $250 per node per year. Now, just to give you a reference, Houston was charging $2,500 per node per year, and that's a tenth of the cost. There are also bills on annexation, and ever since the annexation of Kingwood in 1997, annexation has been a hot topic in Austin. And in response to Kingwood, actually the 76th legislature reformed annexation law in 1999, and these laws have prevented forced annexations for almost 20 years. Now, during the special session, SB 6, which did pass, sought to rewrite the Municipal Annexation Act for annexations of about 200 people. And since the legislation did not affect strategic partnership agreements, like the ones that we've done with River Park, New Territory, and Greatwood, and future annexations with Riverstone, the city is not as affected as other cities, but although we're not as affected, we're still affected. And the new law is going to require the city to speed up its process for acquiring land that has no residents, to avoid many of the additional hoops that we're going to have to go through that are set by the legislature. So this legislation will have great impacts on our non-MUD annexation program. Now, Sugar Land did testify against the bill, and our testimony mostly cited that the existing annexation laws that have been around for almost 20 years have served Sugar Land well, and we've grown responsibly. Now, there was also bills having to do with revenue caps, and in particular financial decision making. And most people agree that tax relief means that they're going to have a lower bill next time around than they had the time before. We've done a lot of number crunching. The Budget Office has taken a look at these bills, and revenue cap and spending cap bills really don't provide tax relief, and can potentially harm public safety and infrastructure funding. Now, just kind of going into it, and this is a very oversimplification about how the bill works, but the current rollback rate in statute is an effective plus 8%. Obviously, there's more to it than that, but for what we're doing today, I just wanted to kind of express the differences. SB 1 would have brought that to effective plus 4%, and HB 4 would have brought it to effective plus 6%. Now, we've just discussed our financial management policy statements, which say that the city manager, as economic conditions permit, would recommend effective plus 3% unless the voters approve a GO bond election. So you can see what we're doing now would not have even been impacted by SB 1 or HB 4. Now, moving over to the graph that you see there, we saw that earlier today. The residential tax bill has three major components. It depends on where you live. There's also in-city MUDs and lids and all kinds of things, but for the most part, this will work. The city is about 15% of the total tax bill. County is about 21%, but the overwhelming majority goes to schools. And we'll get into why that is. Now, emergency services account for about half of our operating expenditures. On the right there, you'll see FY General Fund operating expenditures by department. You can see that. Fire and EMS is about 19%, and police and dispatch are about 28%. So any decreases or any cuts or restrictions to city budgets is going to have to force our city council to be able to make tough decisions. So what have we done to keep taxes low? Sugar Land has increased the homestead exemption from 1% in 2007 to 10% in 2016. By doing it that way, we direct the property tax relief directly to the homeowners. And the city uses a portion of our local tax, sales tax for property tax relief, which has helped drop the tax rate from 50 cents in 1993 to 31.595 cents today. And as Alan had mentioned earlier, Sugar Land has the second lowest tax rate in Texas for a city of similar size. So what is the cause of high property taxes? Well, the cause of high property taxes is the state's inability and sometimes unwillingness to properly fund public schools. The state is going to rely this biennium on local dollars, not state dollars, to fund new population growth of about 168,000 new public students for the next biennium. And that equates to about $7 billion increase to local school property taxes for the next biennium. And that's going to require about a 13% increase. They're counting on a 13% increase in local school property taxes to be able to fund this. That's in the budget. So ultimately, the issue on revenue caps, it's not about tax relief. It's about who should be making decisions about local taxes. And cities must be able to respond to their citizens by making local decisions at the local level. Residents have, like the mayor said, have more representation at the local level. They elect 4 city council members of the 7 city council members versus 2 out of the 181 in the state legislature, which, by the way, only meets every 2 years. So fortunately, Senate Bill 1 and HB 4 did fail to pass, and for very good reasons. So next steps. Staff is preparing for the implementation of new laws, many of which are going to be effective September 1st. Tonight is the first reading of the ordinance for compliance with SB 1004, small cell deployment. Also tonight is going to be the first reading of an ordinance to annex land adjacent to new territory. And on September 5th, we're going to be discussing with y'all on rescinding the hands-free ordinance. So with that, I will take any questions.